I ripped the yellow claim envelope open before I even got through my own front door. And the first thing I saw was the number. $47,200. Fire damage. My name was on the policy. My signature, apparently, was on the settlement release too, except I had never signed it. This is the story of the winter. I stopped being anyone's insurance policy and let the number on my phone screen, 615, do the explaining for me. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a machinist at a precision tool plant outside Cleveland, and I thought I'd raised a son who understood the value of a dollar earned with your hands. I was wrong, and it nearly cost me everything I built. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight, and hit subscribe if you've ever had to protect yourself from someone who shared your blood. You're going to want to see how this ends. It started on a Tuesday in November. I'd gone to check on the old family cabin up near Put-in Bay, the one my father built with his own hands back in 1961, the one I'd promised my late wife Doreen I'd never let go of. I found the back bedroom charred to the studs, smoke damage through the whole first floor. My first thought wasn't anger. It was fear. Had the wiring finally gone bad? The wiring I'd meant to replace for years? I called the insurance company to start a claim, expecting sympathy and paperwork. Instead, the woman on the phone told me the claim was already filed, already processed, already paid out 6 weeks ago to an account that wasn't mine. I stood in that burned bedroom with the phone against my ear and felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. I asked her to repeat the payout amount, $47,200, deposited electronically after a signed release form and matching photo ID were submitted. My photo ID, my signature, notarized on a document I had never seen in my life. I didn't raise my voice on that call. Machinists don't panic when a tool jams. You stop the machine, you find the fault, you fix it. I asked her to email me the full claim file, every document, every timestamp. I thanked her and I hung up, and I stood in the ash of my father's cabin for a long time before I drove home. That night, the file came through. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee going cold beside me and read through 60 pages of documentation with the same patience I once used to read blueprints on the plant floor. The fire report, the adjuster's photos, the release form, and then I found it buried in the metadata of the submitted photo ID scan. A timestamp, and beneath that, an email address the claims office had CC'd on the final confirmation. R. Martinez, legal at a firm I didn't recognize. I didn't know that name. But I knew the second address in that email chain immediately, because I'd watched him grow up typing it into his first computer at 12 years old. My son, Bradley is 38 now, married to a woman named Courtney for 6 years. They live in a rented house in the good part of Westlake that they can't actually afford, the kind with the stone entryway and the 3-car garage. And every single time I'd visited, Courtney had made some small comment about my flannel shirts, my truck with the primer spots, my simple way of living. I'd let it roll off me. Doreen used to say, some people show love by giving, and some people show love by demanding, and Courtney had never learned the first kind. I opened my laptop and did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I logged into the old shared email account Bradley and I had set up back when he was in college. The one I'd forgotten still existed, the one he apparently hadn't. And there it was, an entire thread, going back 4 months, between Bradley and a man calling himself a structured settlement consultant. They'd been planning this since summer. The cabin fire wasn't discovered by accident. In an email dated August 14th, Bradley had written 6 words that I read over and over until they burned themselves into me. The old place is worth burning. I sat with that sentence for a long time. The plan unfolded across the thread like a blueprint for demolition. Bradley knew the cabin was underinsured for its replacement value, but perfectly insured for a fire loss. He'd found a contractor willing to stage an accidental electrical fire for $8,000 cash, paid from an account he and Courtney had opened without my knowledge using my social security number, which he still had memorized from filling out my Medicare paperwork 2 years earlier when I'd had a minor heart scare. He'd forged my signature using a service that matched signatures from old canceled checks. He'd used a photo of my driver's license that I now realized he must have taken secretly the last time I'd left my wallet on his kitchen counter during a Sunday visit. But it was the last email in the thread that took the air out of my lungs. Courtney had written to Bradley 2 weeks earlier, "We can't keep bleeding money waiting on him to die naturally. The house is the real prize. Once we get this insurance money for the renovation fund, It looks legitimate when we push for guardianship next year. Old men who can't manage their affairs don't get to keep four-bedroom houses in Bay Village. My house, my actual home, not the cabin. The house Doreen and I bought in 1988, paid off in full 9 years ago, sitting on a double lot near the lake that had tripled in value. They weren't just stealing an insurance payout. They were building a paper trail, financial recklessness, unexplained fire losses, a pattern they could hand to a judge to prove I was no longer fit to manage my own affairs. The cabin fire wasn't the crime. It was the opening move. I closed the laptop. I did not throw it. I did not call Bradley screaming into the phone the way I might have a year earlier, the way the old Walter would have, hurt and desperate for an explanation that would make this all make sense. There was no explanation that would make this make sense. There was only what I was going to do next. I walked upstairs to the bedroom I used to share with Doreen and opened the closet, where a small fireproof lockbox sat on the top shelf behind old photo albums. Inside was the deed to the house, my will, and a manila folder of documents I'd forgotten. I even had the original ownership papers to the cabin, still in my name alone, never transferred, despite what Bradley apparently believed. Whatever they thought they'd accomplished, they hadn't actually touched the thing that mattered most yet. They had, however, given me something they could never take back. They'd shown me exactly what they thought of me and exactly how far they were willing to go. A man with nothing left to protect is dangerous. A man who still has everything to protect and finally understands the threat is worse. The next morning, I drove into downtown Cleveland to the offices of a woman named Patricia Suarez, an elder law attorney, a retired coworker, had once mentioned handled the ugly family cases nobody wants to talk about. I wore my work jacket and my steel-toed boots. I carried a single folder. I did not want coffee. I did not want small talk. I sat down across from her polished glass desk and told her I needed to understand exactly how much legal protection a person my age could build around themselves in the shortest amount of time possible. Patricia read through the email thread in complete silence, her pen occasionally tapping against the page. When she reached Courtney's line about guardianship, her jaw tightened, and she looked up at me with an expression I recognized from my old plant supervisor right before he'd shut a machine down for safety violations. She told me this wasn't a family dispute. This was insurance fraud, identity theft, forgery, and the early architecture of elder financial exploitation, and she wanted to know if I intended to pursue criminal charges. I told her I intended to pursue everything. We spent the next 4 hours building what Patricia called a fortress. First, the power of attorney 2 years earlier. After my heart scare, I'd signed a general power of attorney naming Bradley, the same trusting mistake he'd been counting on. Patricia drafted the revocation on the spot, notarized, certified copies sent that same afternoon to my bank, my primary doctor, and every hospital network in Cuyahoga County, establishing in writing that Bradley Higgins had no legal authority over my medical or financial decisions, effective immediately. Second, she scheduled me for an independent cognitive evaluation with a geriatric neurologist for the following Monday, not because I doubted my own mind for 1 second, but because I intended to have a sworn, dated, medically documented record of my competency filed with the county before Bradley and Courtney ever got the chance to claim otherwise in front of a judge. Third, and this was Patricia's idea, we drafted a revocable living trust. Every asset I owned, the house in Bay Village, my pension, my savings, and what remained of the cabin property would transfer into that trust by the end of the week, with an independent corporate trustee named as successor. If Bradley wanted to challenge my competency and seize control of my estate, he would find nothing left in my name to seize. The vault, as Patricia put it, would already be empty by the time he found the key. I paid her retainer in a cashier's check and walked out into the cold November air feeling something I hadn't felt in months, steady ground under my feet. From there, I went straight to my bank. I'd banked at the same branch for 22 years, and the manager, a woman named Denise, had known me since Doreen was alive. I told her I needed to speak with her privately, and when I laid out what I'd found, her expression shifted from polite professional concern to something sharper. She pulled up my accounts and found it immediately a secondary debit card issued in my name at my request, she assumed, 6 months earlier. I had never requested it. Bradley had. Using it quietly, in amounts small enough not to trigger fraud alerts, he'd been siphoning roughly $400 a month from my checking account for half a year. Not enough to notice unless you were looking. Exactly enough to add up, I told Denise to cancel every card linked to that account immediately, permanently, no temporary freeze. I told her to close the account entirely and open a new one under the trust, with no secondary authorized users, no exceptions, ever. She processed it while I sat there, watching the numbers on her screen change, feeling each keystroke sever another thread they thought they still held. The cabin property, the burned husk of it, I sold within the week. Not through a realtor with a sign in the yard that Bradley might drive past. I called a cash buyer investment firm that specialized in fire-damaged properties, accepted a price roughly 25% under market for the land alone, and closed in 4 days flat. The money went straight into the trust. As far as public records would eventually show, weeks later, the cabin belonged to a holding company in Columbus. Whatever plans Bradley and Courtney had built around that land, around renovating it into their guardianship narrative, now applied to a piece of dirt they would never legally reach. Then I did the hardest part. I packed one suitcase. I left my recliner in the living room, left a coffee mug in the sink, left my reading glasses folded on the arm of the couch, exactly like a man who just stepped out to get the mail. I turned off my phone, removed the battery, and mailed it the whole device, still intact, to Patricia's office for safekeeping, in case anyone ever needed to prove I hadn't simply vanished off the face of the earth. Then I bought a prepaid phone with cash at a gas station 40 minutes outside my own zip code, told absolutely no one the number, not even Denise, and boarded a one-way flight out of Cleveland Hopkins the following morning. 3 days before Thanksgiving, the holiday Bradley and Courtney had already begun planning, the one where I'd been informed, almost as an afterthought in a group text, that I would be welcome to stop by for dessert at their house, provided I didn't make things awkward in front of Courtney's parents. I landed in Charleston, South Carolina, that afternoon and checked into a small inn 2 blocks from the water. I ordered she crab soup at a restaurant with my feet still cold from Ohio and watched the harbor lights come on, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I slept a full night without waking up at 3 in the morning, running numbers in my head. 2,000 miles from Bay Village, Thanksgiving morning arrived exactly as I knew it would. I sat on a wrought iron balcony with a cup of chicory coffee and an old kitchen timer I'd packed almost as a joke, the same brass-colored dial Doreen used to use for her pie crusts, and I set it, deliberately, for the exact moment I calculated the extended family dinner would be sitting down at Bradley and Courtney's table. Courtney's parents would be there, her sister and brother-in-law, the good china out, and at some point during that meal, someone, Courtney, almost certainly, since presentation mattered more to her than anything, would try to run the family credit card to cover the caterer's final balance, the one I happened to know Bradley had quietly linked to my old checking account 8 months earlier, under the guise of helping Dad simplify his bill pay. The timer ticked down. I didn't need a hidden camera to know what would happen next. I knew my son and his wife with the same precision I once used to read tolerances on a lathe. At 6:15 exactly, the timer went off. 2,000 miles away, in a dining room strung with autumn garland, a caterer's payment terminal returned a decline code that would not resolve no matter how many times it was run. The account had been closed for 9 days. My prepaid phone rang 40 minutes later. I let it go through to voicemail once, just to hear the tone of his voice before I decided whether I owed him a conversation at all. Then it rang again, and I answered. Bradley didn't say hello. He said my name like an accusation, demanding to know why his account had been frozen, why the caterer was standing in Courtney's dining room in front of her parents asking for $400 in cash nobody had, why I was doing this to him during a holiday, as though I were the one who had set fire to a piece of his history and forged his signature to profit from it. I let him finish. I sat with the ocean behind me, calm as still water, and told him there was no account left to freeze, because there was no account left at all. I told him the cabin was sold. I told him the house in Bay Village no longer belonged to Walter Higgins in any way a court could touch, because it belonged to a trust he would never gain access to. I told him, in the same flat, even tone I once used to report a defect on the plant floor, that I had read every email in that thread, his and hers, going back to August 14th, the day he'd written that the old place was worth burning. The silence on the line was long enough that I could hear the caterer's voice in the background, still asking someone to please find another form of payment. He tried anger, first told me I was imagining things, that I was confused, that this was exactly the kind of erratic behavior everyone had been worried about. I told him I had a sworn medical evaluation dated 4 days ago, proving otherwise, filed with the county, and that he was welcome to bring his theory in front of a judge who would also be looking at a documented pattern of unauthorized withdrawals, a forged insurance claim, and a stolen identity used to file it. He went quiet again. Then he tried something worse. He said Courtney was 3 months pregnant, said I wouldn't want to be the kind of grandfather who abandoned his own grandchild over a misunderstanding. I felt that one land exactly where he intended it, to somewhere old and soft and parental, the place Doreen used to say was my one true weakness. But I thought about the sentence he'd typed in August, the sentence about burning, and I understood that this too was a tool, not a truth. A man doesn't get to plan your institutionalization in June and expect your unconditional love in November. I told him that any child born into that house deserved a father who worked for what he had instead of forging it. And then I told him that Stephen, my attorney's investigator, not a name I actually used, a small lie I let sit there, had already forwarded the entire file. The burned cabin, the forged signature, the stolen identity, to the county prosecutor's fraud unit that morning, as a matter of routine documentation, not vengeance. That part was true. The line went dead. Not because he hung up, because Courtney had grabbed the phone. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She told me I was a paranoid old man destroying his own family over some misfiled paperwork, and that she intended to have me evaluated the moment I stepped foot back in Ohio, and that a judge would see exactly what kind of erratic, unstable person sells a family cabin and disappears without telling anyone where he's gone. She told me I'd regret this. She told me they would take everything. I let her finish. Then I told her, calmly, that there was nothing left in my name to take, and that the medical evaluation she was counting on already existed, dated, notarized, and filed, proving the opposite of everything she intended to argue. I told her that the fraud unit didn't care whose idea the fire was, only whose signature was forged and whose bank account received the payout, and both of those led directly back to her husband's email address. I told her the caterer standing in her dining room right now was the smallest bill she was about to discover she couldn't pay. She started to say something else, something sharp, and I simply set the phone down on the iron table beside my coffee and let her keep talking to no one. The Charleston harbor was turning gold at the edges. I picked up my cup, took a slow sip, and didn't feel a single flicker of the fear that used to live permanently behind my ribs whenever that family's name lit up my screen. 2 months passed the way winter always does in the South, slow, mild, forgiving. I heard the rest of it secondhand, through Patricia, in the same measured tone she used for everything. The fraud unit opened a formal investigation. The insurance company clawed back the settlement and referred the case for prosecution. Bradley's employer, a regional bank, placed him on unpaid leave the moment the words identity theft appeared in a background inquiry tied to his name. Courtney's parents, appalled at what the investigation had surfaced, quietly withdrew the $20,000 loan they'd been floating the couple to cover the mortgage on the Westlake rental. Without my $400 a month, without the insurance windfall, without her parents' safety net, Courtney's household finances collapsed within weeks into something neither of them had ever learned to manage on their own. Letters started arriving at Patricia's office in January. Cheap envelopes, my name written in Bradley's uneven handwriting. Patricia asked how I wanted to handle them. I told her to open the first one and read me the general shape of it, nothing more. It was exactly what I expected. Apology, blame, desperation, and near the bottom, the mention of the baby due in April, and a plea that I think about my grandchild's future before I let one bad year define the rest of our family. I told Patricia to send it back unopened, along with everyone that followed, with a single typed note enclosed. Genuine remorse doesn't require a return address for money. It requires time, and it requires distance, and both of those are still available to you free of charge. I did not feel triumphant reading that back to her over the phone. I felt something quieter and heavier grief, mostly for the boy Bradley used to be before ambition curdled into entitlement, before he decided his father's slow, careful life was something to burn down rather than learn from. But grief isn't the same as obligation. I had spent 34 years on a factory floor teaching myself that when a machine is broken beyond safe repair, you don't keep feeding material into it hoping it fixes itself. You shut it down before it takes your hand with it. With what remained from the cabin sale, I did something I hadn't planned when this all started. I set up a small fund through the county's workforce development program, not for family, not for anyone who shared my name, but for young men and women coming up through the trade apprenticeship programs the way I once had, Kids learning to weld and machine and wire houses with their own two hands. Kids nobody was going to hand a shortcut to. I wanted that money to build something instead of insulating someone from consequence. I still walk the beach here most evenings, now that I've settled somewhere permanent, somewhere with my own name back on the deed and nobody's forged signature anywhere near it. My shoulders don't carry what they used to carry. I sleep through the night. When my phone rings now, it isn't with dread, it's mostly Patricia. Occasionally an old coworker checking in, once in a while a wrong number. That makes me laugh out loud at how ordinary and harmless it is. I don't tell this story because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. And I don't tell it for revenge either, though I won't pretend there wasn't a certain justice in watching that caterer stand in their dining room asking for money that no longer existed. I tell it because too many people my age believe that loving your children means handing them the keys to everything you built and hoping they never turn the key against you. Sometimes they don't. But when they do, the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is stop being the machine they think they can run forever without consequence, and let the silence and the clock finally do the talking instead.